Hey everybody, welcome to the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser known board games of the world and share those with you. For today's episode, I thought it would be fun to focus on a newer undiscovered game. I know I do a lot of the older games on this channel, and this game came out in 2018. It's called CEYLON, designed by Suzanne and Chris Zinsley. CEYLON is all about planting, harvesting, and shipping tea in Sri Lanka, which used to be called Ceylon. And this is an old school style Euro game with lots of great player interaction, super simple rules, but some incredibly thoughtful decisions that you have to make throughout the game. And it's mostly player driven. Most of the decisions you make are going to be a result of what your opponents are doing. And this is not multiplayer solitaire whatsoever, and that's what I love about it. The main driver of this game is its action selection mechanism, where you have a hand of cards. Each card shows two possible actions you can take. You play one card, choose one of the actions, and then everybody else at the table gets a chance to do the other action that you didn't pick. So everybody gets to piggyback off of everybody else's turn in this game, which means there's not a lot of downtime. You're also having to weigh, not only which action you want to take, but how does this card benefit or hurt my opponents, because they get to play off of this card as well. The different possible actions are very simple to understand, but they're all very meaningful in their own way, and that makes for some tough choices. The actions are things like plant a field, harvest fields. You can even harvest your opponent's fields, but they'll get points if you do that. So you have to weigh how much you want to help your opponents versus how much you really want to harvest that field. The reason you want to harvest different fields is to get different cube colors, which represent the different types of tea produced at various elevations. We have black, green, and white tea, and you have to collect different combinations of those to be able to ship them out on these train cars up top. That's another possible action you can take, is shipping your tea for money or points. That's another great decision in this game, by the way. When you ship your tea, you have to decide, do you want money or do you want points? It's a simple but agonizing choice, one of my favorite parts of the game. Another possible action is investing in technology, which moves you up the technology track, gives you a bonus action, and will help you break ties at the end of the game, which is also very important. Another thing you can do is hire these counselors. Each region has a separate person that gives you a special ability. If you hire them, you'll have access to that for the rest of the game, and as long as you hired them, they'll let you score points for your fields in their region. It's like an area majority scoring at the end of the game. So there's a lot of great Euro game mechanisms going on in here. It's not that the game does anything new or revolutionary, but what it sets out to do, it does very, very well. I sort of think of this as an appetizer sampler of Euro gaming. You have all these great mechanisms on display here in a very simple to understand format. So let's take a deeper look at CEYLON. I'll show you kind of how it plays. I'm not going to cover every rule in this video because the rule book does a great job of teaching you the game like it should. It's very rare, by the way, that I praise a rule book. All right, so we have the game set up for 4 players. If you look on the board here, you'll see 4 separate regions broken up by these rivers here. Each region has 3 levels of terrain. We set up this randomly at the beginning of the game. It's kind of a modular setup thing where there's all these different terrain shapes, and you can kind of play around with how you set it up. The reason that's important is fields planted on the top level will always produce white tea or white cubes. Fields planted on the middle level will always produce green cubes or green tea, and fields planted on the bottom level will always produce black tea. So that's the only reason the different elevations matter, is the type of tea that they produce. And there's a nice reminder of that here on your player board. Each player also gets to choose a starting field on the board. So you start with the start player and go clockwise around the table. Each player must start on ground level, and everybody must start in a different region, but the players get to choose where their starting field goes. So you just take one of these field tokens, place it there, and then their little worker starts on that field along with their first leaf off of their player board. You'll notice everybody starts with their leaves filled on their player board here. Every time you plant a new field, you take the leftmost leaf off your board. So these come off your board from left to right, and these leaves just mark that you planted that field. That will come into play when players harvest fields, as well as for area majority scoring at the end of the game. Over here we have the technology track. Each player starts with 1 disc on this technology track. Every time you move up this track, you're going to take one of these bonus tiles at the top. I'll explain more about those in a minute. You also have one of your discs on the scoring track, which goes around the outside of the board. That just tracks your points. Everybody starts with 0 points. Everybody also starts with 15 money stored right here on your player board, as well as 1 black cube stored here in your warehouse. Now, this says max 5. That's because you have a hand limit of 5 cubes at any given time during the game. So you can never have more than 5 cubes in your warehouse. Over here, you'll notice a stack of bonus tokens. They're numbered 10, then 6, then 3, then 1. All this is a race to plant a field in all 4 regions of the board. The first player to plant a field in all 4 regions gets to take this top tile worth 10 points. The next player to plant a field in all 4 regions gets this one only worth 6 points, and so on down the line. So there's a little incentive there to plant early in all 4 areas of the board. It's almost like a little distraction sitting there just tempting you to go for that, because there's always going to be one player that goes for that 10-pointer right off the bat. So there's a nice little tension from the very beginning of the game. I love that they included this little bonus part for planting in all 4 areas. Finally, I want to draw your attention to these people in each region. Each region has a counselor. It's kind of like an overseer or a helper that you can hire to basically give you a special ability that you have access to the rest of the game. And that's what these discs here are used for. These you just mark if you've hired that counselor. So as soon as you hire them, you place a disc out. That just shows that you have access to that counselor's ability. So that's why you have 4 discs here. You could potentially hire each counselor, 1 for each region. Now, the counselor's abilities are really nice, and they come out different every game because you shuffle up the tiles and deal 1 randomly to each counselor. And there's more tiles too that are in the box, so the game's going to feel a little different every time you play, and I really like that subtle variation in setup. It makes all the difference. So all there is to learning this game is learning 5 pictures. That's how I like to teach this. There's cards. Each card shows a picture on top and a picture on the bottom. These pictures correspond to actions you get to take. So there's basically just 5 pictures to learn. Once you learn what each picture means, you'll learn the game. Once again, I'm not going to cover every single rule here, but when you teach the game, teach it this way, because this makes it very easy for people to understand. Everybody starts with a hand of 3 cards. We have a deck of action cards here. We shuffled these and everybody drew 3 cards to start the game. On your turn, you're going to play 1 card to this spot right here. Depending on how you position this card is going to determine which action you take and which action everybody else gets to take. So if it was my turn, I would choose 1 card from my hand. I place it down here. Whichever picture is pointing at this single dot, that's the action I get to do. So I would do my action first. Then you go clockwise around the table, and everybody else has the chance to do this action here, which is pointing at these 3 dots. So let's go over each one of these actions individually. First here we have plant. This is very simple. Play this card, you have to pay $5, that's this little red 5 here, pay $5 from your supply to the bank, and you can plant a field where your little worker guy is standing. Now, if he's on a field that's already been planted, you cannot plant. And if you don't have $5, you can't plant as well. But if your little worker guy is out on an open hexagon and you have 5 coins to spend, you just simply place a field out on where your little guy is, and then you take your leftmost leaf off your board and place it on that field. That shows that you planted that field. That's your field for the rest of the game. Once again, always take your leaves off from left to right off your player board. I'll explain why that matters here in a moment. The next action to learn is harvest. That's this picture here. When you harvest, you're going to collect cubes from the supply. That represents harvesting these fields and getting tea. Now again, this is where the terrain height is important. So if you harvest from a level 0 field, you get a black cube. If you harvest from a level 1 field, you get a green cube. And if you harvest from that top level field, you get a white cube. So just keep that in mind. When you harvest, you can harvest the field that your worker is on and any field directly touching your worker. So you just look at all the adjacent fields to wherever your worker is. In this example here, my worker is standing on a level 0 field, so I could get a black cube from this field, I could get a black cube from this field, I could get a green cube from this field, and I could get a white cube from this field, but I don't get anything from here or here because there's no field there to harvest. And you can choose, you don't have to harvest all the fields, but just keep in mind your warehouse can only hold 5 cubes. So if you harvest a bunch of cubes, you you have to discard down to your 5 right away. Now, when you harvest, you also have to pay attention to who owns the field, whose colored leaf is on that field. If you harvest your own field, nothing happens. You just take the cubes from the supply. But if you harvest from an opponent's field, they get 1 point. It's 1 point per field that you harvest of an opponent. So in this example, if I harvest a black cube here from my own field, a black cube here from pink's field, and then a green and a white cube from blue's fields over here, well, blue player gets 2 points and pink player gets 1 point, and I don't get any points, of course, for harvesting my own field. So this is a really fun decision to weigh. Do you really want to give your opponents points to get the cube colors you need, or do you want to plant your own fields, harvest your own fields? And sometimes it's even fun to try to entice your opponents to harvest when they're standing close to your fields, because remember, every time you play that action card, your opponents are going to get a chance to do the other action on the card. So sometimes you might want to play that card in such a way where your opponents get to do the harvest action, and then potentially you could get a lot of points, if all the other players harvest and they're using your field. So that's just one of many little subtle strategies you can try in this game. Let's keep it moving here to the next action. This symbol here means shipping your goods onto these trains. So if you have some cubes stored up, you would play this action card to ship them onto one of these 3 trains. You can only ship on 1 train at a time, and you have to already have the cubes stored up in your warehouse here. For example, this train here requires a black, a green, and a green cube, or this train car here requires a black, and a white cube. So let's say I had a black, and a white cube stored up. I could play my shipping card, cash in my black, and white cube, and take this card right here. Now, as soon as you take one of these, you have a very tough decision to make. It's a very simple decision, but it is agonizingly difficult. You'll notice on the bottom here, it has a 4 in the leaf. The leaf means points, so you can take 4 points, or you can take 12 money. You have to make that decision right now. This is one of the best parts of this game, in my opinion. It's such a simple decision, but I always hear players groaning in agony over that simple choice because it's such a discrepancy between points and money. Like in this example, it's 4 points, but it's 12 money. And money's very hard to get in this game. A lot of times you'll take the points and then you'll instantly regret not taking the money, or vice versa. You'll take the money and then the end of the game comes up and you're like, oh, I needed those 4 points. And these train cars pay out differently depending on the types of cubes they require. And it's also worth noting that when you complete one of these contracts, you have to have a space available on your player board. And that's where these leaves come into play. Remember I said you take your leaves off your board when you plant fields. Well, that frees up spaces to place these train contracts, because these have to go face down here on your player board in an available slot. And you can only place unique numbers in each slot. So if I take this number 4 contract, I place it here. Now, if I want to complete a different numbered contract, like say this number 2 contract with the black, green, green, if I do that on a later turn, I have to have a separate slot available to place that number 2 contract. Whereas if I complete another number 4 contract, I could just stack it here on my number 4 that I've already completed. So you can complete, multiple of the same number, but you really want to try to diversify your numbers, because at the end of the game, you're going to get points based on how many different numbers you have completed. That's what this means here. For each unique number you have on your board, you're going to get a certain number of points. So I'll go over that when I discuss the end game scoring, but that's kind of how the contracts work. You have these different numbers you got to go for, but also the cube colors. So you're thinking about 2 things there, and then when you complete them, you have that very important decision of money versus points. So excellent decisions in the shipping space of the game. Next, we're going to move on to the technology action. That is this symbol here. When you play this action, you have to pay $5. Everybody else gets $1 from the bank. So you'll see here That 5 red, that's what you pay, and then the 1 coin is what everybody else takes. So that's what that means. To buy technology, you pay $5 and you simply move your disc up 1 space on this technology track. Every time you move your disc up, you immediately take one of these technology tiles and place it on your player board here. And what that means is you can spend that when it's your turn. So you have to be the one playing the card. You spend that when it's your turn to take a bonus action of any type. The only one you can't choose is buying more technology, but any other of the actions you can choose to do with a technology tile. And this is huge. This opens up your flexibility so much because a lot of times you're limited by the cards you have in your hand. It's like, oh, I really need to plant first, but I don't have the plant action. Oh, wait, it's a good thing I invested in technology because I can spend that tile before I play my card, plant a field, then harvest that field with my action card. Or however you want to do it. You can play the technology right after you play your action card too. So you could harvest a field and then immediately play your technology tile to ship your goods that you just harvested. So you can save those technology tiles up till a later turn. It's just you can only spend one of them per turn, and you can only spend them when it's your turn to play a card. So those technology tiles are very valuable, and the technology track is going to break any ties at the end of the game. There's also a couple spaces. If you push really far up the technology track, you'll just get 5 points here and here. So do not ignore that technology track. That's just a pro tip from me who's played this game quite a bit. A lot of newer players tend to ignore the technology track, or they just don't think it's that important, or maybe they forget about it. So just reiterate that when you're teaching this game, all these different actions are equally valid, equally important for different reasons. And that's what makes this a great Euro game. The final picture to learn here is this one here, which shows all 4 of these counselor people. Remember, each region has 1 counselor that offers a special ability. This is how you get access to that ability. So you play this card, and then wherever your little worker person is, that's the region you're allowed to buy influence in or hire that counselor. So I would play this card. If my worker guy's up here, I can purchase influence here in Candy. So I would take my disc, place it out, and now I have access to this special ability for the rest of the game. What this one says is whenever I take the planting action, I pay 1 less coin. So it's actually $4 to plant instead of 5. There's a lot of great abilities here, like this one down here says max of 6. So my warehouse can hold 6 cubes instead of 5 for the rest of the game if I hire this counselor. But just remember, you can only hire the counselor where your little worker person is, and I'll explain how to move your little worker here in the next step. And it's worth noting multiple players can hire the same counselor. That's why there's 4 spaces here for discs, 1 for each player. Now, another reason you need to hire these counselors is they're going to allow you to score area majority for your fields in their region at the end of the game. So you're going to score points if you have the most or second most or third most or fourth most field in their region, but you have to have hired them during the game. So you have to have your disc out there before the end of the game in order to be eligible for that end game scoring in their region. That's something that's kind of easy to forget, so really reiterate that if you're teaching this to a new player. So that's hiring these counselors. Now I want to note on these cards, see this middle section here, there's these little feet and then there's this 2 money symbol. What that says is if you ever choose not to do this main action of the picture, or if you can't do the main action of the picture, you can instead choose one of these central actions here, which is either moving your person or just simply taking 2 money from the bank. So like if I played this card like this, I could just forfeit this action and instead just take 2 money. But then everybody else at the table could either do this action or move or take 2 money. So everybody can always either move or take 2 money or do the pictured action. So if you choose the movement action, this is the only way you can move your little worker around the board. So a lot of times during the game, you have to choose this movement action. movement can get very expensive. You move your worker one step at a time adjacent. The rivers and the terrain make no difference for moving, so it's just one step at a time. The first move is always 0, it's always free, but then every step after that gets progressively more expensive. So it would be 0 to move here, then 1 coin, then an extra 2 coins, then an extra 3 coins, then an extra 4 coins. So you're adding an extra coin every time you move. So it's like 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. Now, if you're lucky enough to be playing in a game with this special ability in play, this gives you cheaper movement. So if you hired this Councilor, you would be able to move for 0 for the first step, then only 1 coin for every additional step you take. So that reduces your cost to move around the board if you hire that Councilor. These are great, simple, but tough considerations, and I just love all the different choices this game gives you while keeping the rules so simple. It's really a good design. So to recap the turn, you play a card, you do your action, you decide if you're going to spend a technology tile or not to do a bonus action. Then you go clockwise around the table. Everybody else chooses to either do the action that's facing them or one of those central actions, moving or taking money. So you go around the table. Once the last player takes their action, then the player that played the card refills their hand back up to 3 cards. That will trigger the end of that turn, and then the next player goes. And it's important to wait to refill your hand until everybody takes their action. That helps you track who is the active player, who played the card. If you refill your hand right away, it's easy to forget because, you play your card, then everybody else gets to take an action off that card. Then sometimes it's easy to forget, who actually played the card. So just wait till everybody takes their actions, then refill your hand to end your turn. The game end is triggered as soon as one player plays their last leaf off their board onto the main map, or when this draw deck of cards gets depleted. That will also trigger the end of the game. In either case, you finish out the round so that everybody at the table has the same number of turns to be the active player, and then you'll end the game and do end game scoring. The end game scoring is very nicely summarized here on your player board. First, you do majority scoring in 3 different categories. So you compare your money. Whoever has the most, second most, third most, and fourth most money will get 10, 6, 3, and 1 point respectively. It's important to note also with these majority scorings, you have to have something to be eligible to score. So if you have 0 money, you're not eligible to score. Also remember, all ties for this are broken in favor of this technology track. Then you look at area majority for your fields planted. That's what this means right here. So you look at each region individually, and whoever has the most, second most, third most, fourth most fields in that region gets 10, 6, 3, and 1 point respectively. Once again, you have to have bought influence in that region. You had to hire that Councilor, so your disc has to be in that region to even be eligible for majority scoring. Then you're going to look at the technology track. Whoever's the farthest ahead on that gets 10 points. Second farthest gets 6 points, and so on. In that regard, it's top to bottom if you're stacked on top of each other. And then every time you move up that track, by the way, you always jump on top of the stack, and then that's going to break ties in favor of top to bottom on the stacked discs on the technology track. And once again, it's important to note you're not eligible to score any points here unless you've moved up at least 1 space on the technology. Then we move on to this part of scoring, and this is just going to be points per unique number on these completed contracts, these train cards that you have on your board. So if you ended the game with like 3 number 4 contracts, 2 number 2 contracts, and 2 number 1 contracts, well, that's only 3 unique numbers, so that's only worth 6 points. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to complete a lot of the same numbers because you're still getting those points or money during the game. It's just the end game scoring is better if you can have different numbers. The last thing for scoring is minus 2 points per leaf left on your board. At that point, whoever has the most points is the winner. Again, any ties are broken in favor of the technology track. That's pretty much how to play CEYLON. I ended up covering most of the rules in this video, so you can kind of use this as a supplement to the rulebook. Definitely still read the rulebook. I know one thing I forgot to mention is when you use a technology tile, like if you choose the planting action with your technology tile, you still have to pay that cost of $5 to plant. So it's not a free action, it's just a bonus action on your turn. Another thing is like when you're moving your little worker around, you can share spaces with other people, you can move through their fields. It's just that you cannot plant a field on top of somebody else's field. So yeah, you can move as far as you want as long as you can afford to pay for it. And just remember that when you choose the move action or the take 2 money action, you know, those middle actions on the card, that is your action for the turn. So you can't do the pictured action and move unless you spend a technology tile, of course. Like you could spend one of your technology tiles just to move and then do your pictured action of harvesting or whatever, but you don't get to move and do your pictured action. That's 2 separate actions. Or taking 2 money, you know, that's its own action. Sometimes in the game you run out of money and you just have to waste that card and take 2 money, but you still have to think about how you orient the card and what action you're giving to the other players at the table. So that multi-use card mechanism in this game is so simple, but it's so good. It works really, really well. I love a lot of things about this game. I'm going to talk real quick about a couple minor issues I have with it. My main concern with this game is that 4 players, the playtime just drags on a little bit. It runs a little long. I'd say the game lasts about 20 to 30 minutes too long with 4 players, and that's because every turn there's an extra player taking an action every time there's a turn. When I play this game at 3 players, it just zips around the table. You still have enough players competing for area majorities out on the board, yet the turns are a lot faster. It doesn't take as long to get back to you to do your next card and stuff like that. So in my experience, I prefer this game with 3 players. Now, Board Game Geek disagrees. It says best at 4 over there based on that poll. But for me personally, just in my experience, 3 is the sweet spot. It's the perfect length. You know, when you play the game with 2 players, you do shrink the board a little bit. You block off some of the sections. And still though, at 2 players, you lose that player interaction, and you know, there's not as much battling for area majority, there's not as much harvesting of the other players' fields and things like that. I really, really like the interaction in this game, and 3 players is excellent. 4 players is still very good. It's very tense and tight at 4 players, but just be prepared for the game to drag on a little bit, and it just seems like it takes forever to get through that deck of cards when you're playing with 4 players. Other than that, I really like this game. I have this rated an 8.5 out of 10. That's a very solid 8.5. It would be a 9 out of 10 if it weren't for that issue with 4 players, because I play most of my games at 4 players, and this is one that I kind of hesitate to bring out with 4 players because I know it's going to take a little longer than I want it to. So if it weren't for that, I would consider this a top tier game in my collection, which is 9 and above. So I definitely recommend checking out CEYLON, especially if you like older style Euro games. You know, this just feels like it came out in like 2005 or something. It does not feel like a 2018 release, and that's one of my favorite things about it. I love the way it looks on the table. It's got great artwork, sort of like a muted earthy tone color scheme, very classic, very Euro gamey. I think this is one of those rare games that sort of grows with you. You can use this as a gateway game because the rules are simple enough, but you can show this to some serious gamers too, and they're going to get a lot out of it as well. They're not going to really look down on it as being too entry level or too basic. You know, the players that are playing it are going to drive the depth of the decisions. It's a very versatile game. It sort of adapts to the crowd that's playing it. I love all the different special abilities that the Councilors offer and how those come out different every game. You know, some of those are crazy powerful, but you just don't have enough money to walk all the way over to the other side of the board sometimes. Money is very hard to get. Points are very hard to get. This game is quite a grind, I will say, and it feels like a very tense, gritty type of a Euro game. It's not a point salad game. It's not necessarily like an engine building game or a feel-good game. You really have to work. You feel like you're grinding it out to plant these fields and harvest this tea and just get one of those contracts fulfilled, and then somebody else jumps in and takes the one that you could qualify for. I love how you can look around the board, and see what cubes everybody's saving up, and then it's like, oh, okay, nobody can ship anything this turn, so I'm going to play this card so they can't ship anything, and I can do an action, and they're going to be stuck either moving or taking money. And it's great to have money saved up in this game too, because if somebody plays a card that lets you do technology, you better have $5 saved up, or you're going to be just taking 2 money or walking 2 steps or something boring. You have to set yourself up for opportunities that might arise based on the cards that other players play. So there's lots of great little subtle depth that reveals itself the more you play, and the game is trickier than it looks too. I mean, when you learn the game, it seems like a pretty simple game, but it is a tough game to master. Sometimes it'll take you 6 turns just to accomplish one little task. Everything depends on everyone else at the table, and I love that. There's a great balancing act. The game, pulls you all these different directions. The other players pull you all these different directions. You really have to stay focused, stay disciplined, and you do get better at the game the more you play it. So there you have it, CEYLON. Very high marks from me. Luckily, this one's still pretty easy to find here in the United States. On the secondhand market, there's a lot of new copies floating around still. So keep your eyes open and reserve your judgment until you try it with 3 players. Does this look like a game you would enjoy? Have you ever played CEYLON? Does this look like it reminds you of any other games you've played? Let me know in the comments. I love to chat about board games, and I'm happy to interact with all of you on a regular basis. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel for more undiscovered games just like this. As long as my subscribers are going up, I'm going to keep putting out videos on a regular basis. If you like what you see, there is a digital tip jar in the description below. It's just a PayPal link if you want to support the channel any further. You can donate any amount you like. That just helps keep the channel alive, and I don't expect that, but I really do appreciate all of you out there who have graciously donated to the channel. It really means a lot to me. I just do this for fun, and there's lots of ways to help the channel, by the way. You can just make sure you're subscribed. You can try to get your friends to subscribe. You can follow me over on Instagram at undiscovered_games. I post a lot of written reviews and cool pictures over there as well. So thanks for watching. I'll be back with another episode here in a couple weeks. Until then, this is your Undiscovered host saying thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.